Thursday, March 3rd, 2011, Dinner and Learn, God of Understanding, Part 14.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Judaism and Recovery. We're reading from the book God of Our Understanding, Jewish Spirituality and Recovery from Addiction. And we are tackling part 4 of the book, which is healing each other. And the 3 parts of that is sponsorship, fellowship, and tolerance. It's a study on a piece of the Talmud, in the book of Ethics of Our Fathers, chapter 1. I just saw somebody quoting it today on Facebook. The sages teach, make for yourself a teacher, acquire for yourself a friend, and judge every person favorably. Those 3 pieces reflect the need for sponsorship, for fellowship, and for tolerance. And they are keys to recovery. So we're going to slowly read through those chapters. I'm not sure if we're going to finish the whole chapter today. We'll start and we'll get going. Chapter 11. Sponsorship. One certain addict humorously relates, I can't stand other people. That's why it's ironic that I care so much what they think of me. This is on page 91. Recovery as a process of spiritual growth demands not only that we heal our relationships with others, but more so that we realize that it is through our relationships with others that we are healed. Without proper interaction, not only is part of our recovery that we should have proper interactions with others, but really we can't recover fully unless we have appropriate relationships with others. Many recovery want to point out that the first word in the steps is we, and that recovery is such as a we program. They will also tell you that the difference between the well and the ill is we and I. Well is we, LL, and ill is ILL. So what does it mean? Addiction is fundamentally a disease of isolation. By isolation, it doesn't mean that people don't have any friends. You may have even 1.4 million followers on Twitter, but that doesn't make you not lonely, not isolated. Addiction is fundamentally a disease of isolation. Through active addiction, one becomes wrapped up in self and increasingly divorced from everything that is objectively real. I believe these words are in the big book, Objectively Real. Our reality is really very dependent on how we perceive it. And then there is objective reality. The more we are in tune with people, the more objective our reality is, because we have others to check with. The more isolated we are, the more out of tune is our reality. Because our reality is happening between our 2 ears rather than in the real world. So, the solution to addiction, which is created by not being in touch with reality, is to be in touch with reality. How are we in touch with reality? By having sponsorship, fellowship, and tolerance. By developing the appropriate positive relationships with others, the addict is gradually released from the prison of self-obsession. Primarily, the 12 steps prescribe a relationship with God as the means to transcending the ego. However, it is impossible to keep this relationship separate from dealing with other human beings. As the Hasidic masters taught, if one loves the Father, One must love all of his children. To be sure, there are various kinds of relationships that are needed for our well-being. Not all relationships are the same, nor do they need to be, but all are indispensable. Last week we talked about spousal relationships and parental relationships. Each one of them serves a different purpose in how we live our lives and how we grow. Every single relationship gets us out of ourselves and connects us with reality with a capital R, objective reality. That's the holy grail. Objective reality. If only we can achieve connection with true reality, then a lot of our problems will disappear, because that's where they start. The sages teach in the Mishnah, the piece of Talmud we quoted earlier, make for yourself a teacher, acquire for yourself a friend, and judge each person favorably. If we look closely, we will notice that the sages are enumerating three specific components or connectedness with others. To state each one in a word, they are mentorship, fellowship, and tolerance. Not surprisingly, in recovery as well, we find these three virtues are stressed as vital elements of healing and growth. Healing and growth. Okay? Everyone understands healing and growth. Healing is first fixing what's broken from before, and once we have fixed that, we can continue growing from that point on after we have equaled out everything. And we need those both for our healing and for our growth. Those in recovery find it crucial to have a mentor, someone to check in with and to look for guidance. Having a sponsor is considered an essential as any other ingredients of working a successful 12-step program. Fellowship is another cornerstone of recovery. The entire premise of 12-step groups is that the people who share a common problem to recover together, and that their mutual understanding and support provides that which no amount of outside professional help can replace. That's a long sentence, but that says basically the best person out there to help a recovering addict is a recovering addict. Finally, the 12 steps teach that we must have compassion and understanding for all. That's step number 12. The addict in recovery learns that it is necessary to be at peace with all people, and that negative attitudes towards others, such as resentment, intolerance, and indignation, only serve to keep us sick. It's everyone else's fault. If all my problems are because everyone in this world is stupid, then I am never going to be better. As soon as I stop calling people stupid, then I don't have to stay sick anymore. I have a way out. Because I can be the problem, and then I can be the solution. So when I'm looking at the problem like this, I will stay sick. And it usually comes from intolerance and judgment. The Lubavitcher Rebbe explained that these three principles are presented in conjunction with one another. They don't happen to be in the same sentence because all three are needed. Mentorship, fellowship, and tolerance. But they're actually connected to each other because we can't have one without having the other two. To serve as an all-inclusive instruction of how to address the totality of the human race. Because there's three types of people with whom we can relate to. Among people, we will find those in whom we recognize some superior quality, those whom we admire and would like to emulate. So these are people that I think that are above me, in the sense that what they achieve is what I want to achieve. I look up to certain people. The second type of people in the world, then there are those who we may not necessarily look as mentors, but with whom we share certain like-mindedness and common goal. So I don't look up to them, but I look straight at them. I consider them my equals. And then finally, there are those people with whom we see no reason to associate. I look down at them. So there's people that I look up to, people that I look down at, and people I consider my equals. We cannot look up to them, nor can we even relate to them as peers. They may be individuals who are seriously flawed, those who have hurt us, or even people who are truly unhealthy for us to be around. So not only do we consider them less than our, but they could also be objectively under us. How do I know that? Because the Mishnah talks about them as such people who are beneath my level. So maybe objectively they are beneath my level. It could be the truth. We're by nature exceedingly skilled at finding justification for ourselves, and at the same time being judgmental of others. In truth, however, we should save our piecing scrutiny for ourselves and use our great power of rationalizing to see others in a positive light. Which is, this sentence is based on a story, I believe that happened with the 6th Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, that asked his father, why do we have two eyes? Why do we have two eyes? And his father told him, the left eye is to look critically at yourself, and the right eye is to look favorably at others. And it doesn't mean that you have to beat yourself up. That's not what it means. Looking critically at yourself doesn't mean that you have to look down upon yourself. It means that when possible, you try to find the truth about the motivation behind my actions. I have to look for the truth on the motivation behind my actions instead of finding justifications, excuses. When I look at other people, that's when I have to make excuses for them. Justification for them. Put them in the best light possible. Because maybe, just maybe, that's exactly the light under which they should be seen. Stephen Covey starts his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People, with a story of him being in the subway in New York. Many have started their book with that story, so I assume a lot of people were on that subway car that morning. But basically, it's early in the morning, he's going to work, and a father comes in with a bunch of kids, and they're being disruptful. And the father's doing nothing about it, he's just sitting there and staring, and the kids are running all over the place, and he's pissed, and everyone's pissed, and it's going on and on, how he describes how everyone's judging those people. And then someone can't hold himself back and goes over to the father and says, can't you just take care of those kids? Do you need help with something? He says, yes. I can't take care of those kids and I need help with something. We just spent the whole night at the hospital where their mother just died. And we're on our way home. And I truly have lost it. I don't know what to do. And he says, that's when the perception of the whole situation suddenly shifts in everyone's mind. I'm like, oh, poor little kids. Oh, poor little guy. Oh, a minute ago you were cursing him in your head. And now, suddenly, poor little guy. Did the guy change? Did the kids change? No. Your perception in your head changed. That's where the change happened between you. How they had the worst intentions in the world, and they're out there to get me or to get somebody. They're evil. And the two eyes that God gave us is a reminder that we need to shift that attitude. That's how we relate to other people. That's how we can have a connection with others. By making ourselves less as of a saint and giving the benefit of the doubt to the other person. That's how I can be in a relationship. That's how I can connect with others. Because if I'm walking out self-righteously, and I'm looking at everybody as evils, then I'm alone. I'm isolated. I'm the only good guy on earth. Okay. In this chapter, we shall discuss the first of these three aspects of interpersonal relationships, how we relate to those with whom we recognize as being above us. Then in the chapter that follow, we will discuss in detail the other kinds of relationships as well. So in the chapter of fellowship and tolerance, we'll talk more about the people that we judge and how to get over that. So, we'll start with how do we relate to people who are above us. It's interesting to me that people who know little else about recovery have somehow heard about the idea of a sponsor. But what is a sponsor? What a sponsor is not is someone who will take care of your problems for you. I've heard many sponsors telling sponsees, I'm not your lawyer or your bank. Do not call me to get you out of jail or for a loan. I have a friend who's a doctor. He's a very nice guy. And he's in recovery, and he sees always recovering addicts for free and all that stuff. And then people start taking advantage of him and say, can I borrow money from you? He says, oh, I have a deal with the bank. What's the deal? He says, they don't see patients, and I don't give out money. That's the deal I have with the bank. So what is a sponsor? Some old-timers sum it up with a cute acronym. Same person offering newcomers suggestions on recovery. More specifically, a sponsor is a mentor. A sponsor is someone to whom to be accountable. A sponsor is someone whom you trust because they possess the qualities that you would like to have yourself. Interestingly enough, if this is our definition of sponsor, then according to the Torah, everybody should have a sponsor. Not only people in recovery. The Torah says, as one of, we just read in the Talmud, right? In addition to the above-quoted teaching from the Mishnah, the very same words are repeated again by another sage in another teaching in the same book of Ethics of Our Fathers. Make for yourself a teacher and free yourself of doubt. Do not die by estimation, even if giving in excess of the required amount. So in the same chapter in Ethics of Our Fathers, it says twice, make yourself a teacher. One time it says, make yourself a teacher, acquire yourself a friend, and judge every person favorably. And the next page, it says again the same thing. Acquire yourself a teacher, but then it says, remove yourself from doubt, so you're not outside an estimation, even if you're going to give more. So the question is asked, since the directive to have a teacher was rarely mentioned, why was it found necessary to restate it here? In this second version of the teaching, a reason is given for the importance of having a mentor. Free yourself of doubt. Without someone to look up to for guidance, one can become mired in uncertainty. The role of a mentor is to help clarify those matters to you find perplexing so that you can make a decision one way or the other without hesitation or regret. Don't you hate the regret part of it? Because you made a decision already, finally, after hours and hours or days or months of hesitation. And then when you made the decision, now starts the exact same thing but the other way, backwards. Regret. The sponsor may offer clarity in a number of ways, including sharing lessons learned from personal experiences, directing the sponsor to read program literature, or encouraging the sponsee to seek the advice of others in the fellowship. Further, the context of this teaching is important. It juxtaposes the two statements, make for yourself a teacher and do not hide the estimation. If one is uncertain of one's obligation, he or she might decide to act more stringently than necessary. As in the case where one does not know how to measure how much to give to charity and does give overly liberal amounts. The Mishnah tells us, the Talmud, that this is not a desirable approach. Which means, never mind, we're not talking about the guy that because he doesn't know, he's going to do less. We don't need that Mishnah to tell us that. This piece of the Talmud specifically talks about a person who's overzealous. And just because he does not want to consult with someone else, he's taken the liberty of being more stringent upon himself in his requirements. So what is he doing? He's overextending himself. He doesn't want to ask his therapist or his sponsor if you should do that, if you should drive to Rochester Hills to pick up an addict, because he knows that the sponsor and the therapist are going to say, oh no, that's not good for you, you're overextending yourself. So they don't call the sponsor, so they can go and overextend themselves. Because I feel it. That little thing that happens between your head. It's not a desirable approach. Very often the best of intentions leads one to overextend oneself, creating an untenable situation. It may seem preferable to err on the side of caution and do more than one is obligated, yet ultimately such a plan is doomed to fail. One should instead find a teacher who can give him or her clear guidelines to the exact nature of his or her obligations and follow the teacher's advice, whether it seems to be lenient or stringent. It's so relieving when I don't have to make a decision. Why do I have to carry the burden if I have an option to have another human being help me so I don't have to be hesitant and I don't have to have regrets? In working a 12-step program, one of the vital functions of a sponsor is to provide clarity. I once knew a fellow in recovery named Fred.
Fred was already in the program for a few years and went to step 10. Continued to take personal material when wrong company. Admitted, in the zeal to work the step properly, had forced himself to develop a habit of immediately apologizing to anyone who he thought they had offended or wrong. The problem was that since taking the step, his relation with others had gotten worse. At home, I worked with friends. Instead of smoothing things over, he was getting into confrontation. Fred finally spoke to his sponsor and explained his dilemma. He was truly baffled, for after all, he was only doing the program's right. His sponsor only had to listen to a few examples of how Fred's 10th step was getting him into trouble before giving the following advice. The step says we take inventory, and when we're wrong, we promptly admit it. How fast can you possibly take inventory? Fred's sponsor advice then was to take just one inventory at the end of the day before bed. And if he found some fault in any way, he could talk to the people concerned the next day. The most important thing to me is that the advice of Fred's sponsor is in no way universal. Not everyone has to work the step that way. For some people, they might actually need to make amends as quickly as possible. The point is, by talking to a sponsor for the gain of certain clarity, they may have come to his own. This leads us to another point. Page 95. Another important aspect of sponsorship is that it allows one to assume a perspective different than what's from one's own. And sometimes we need to ask, just like the guy in the train. The value of being able to get out of your own head cannot be underestimated. When one is stuck in his or her own way of perceiving things, there can often seem to be nowhere to turn. A sponsor has a distinct advantage of being someone who is not you. Period. And sees your life from a different, usually far more objective vantage point. And you know, the Talmud says that a person who is tied up, locked up, cannot unlock himself. He needs another person to untie his hands, unless you're Houdini. Right? Is that the name of the guy who unties himself? But for most people, if your hands are tied, you need someone else to untie them. You don't need someone smarter than you. You don't need someone stronger than you. You don't need someone more intelligent than you, kinder than you, or anything like that. All you need is someone that is not you. Because you are tied up. There's an saying that even when you give up alcohol, you still have alcoholism. What is ism? I sponsor myself, ISM. In other words, physical sobriety is easy to achieve. Just stop drinking. Gaining an outlook on life that is drastically different from the one that you used to is much harder. The Torah said that when Moses beheld the burning bush, he remarked, "Let me move away from here and see this great sight." Literally, this means what it sounds like. Moses physically moved from the place where he had been standing in order to gain a better view of the bush and the deeper level of the bush. Shem Tov explained that the verse describes a shift in spiritual perspective as well. Moses had to shift from being who he thought he was, which is an Egyptian person who grew up in the king's palace, and suddenly when he's shown the burning bush, which turned him into becoming the leader of the Jewish people, it wasn't just the natural outcome that was expected from a person like Moses. He was considered an Egyptian prince. He ran out wherever he was. He got married, he quit everything. And now he was told that he has to be a leader of the people and take them out of Egypt. So he had to have a shift, not only a physical shift, but an emotional shift, an intellectual shift, and an attitudinal, a shift of attitude. That one. Attitudinal. A shift of attitude. That's the one that says about Carl Jung. A new set of ideas, emotions, and attitudes. It's spiritual awakening. But most of us, if one wishes to behold the divine, he must be ready to move from his current stance and assume a new way of looking at things. Thus, upon encountering the divine, even a righteous and highly refined individual such as Moses saw fit to move to a new vantage point. The Talmud says a person is always biased towards himself. Those we must always move away from here, from the inherent subjectivity of where we presently stand and try to get into perspective. In other words, we learn not to rely solely on our own view. And how many times
convinced that there is no other way to look at it. We're blinded. We get into this tunnel vision where it seems like there is no point of consulting with another person because what other way is there to see this? Only to take the leap of faith and consult with another person and not find out there's another way to do this. There's 10 other ways to do this. And they're all better than my way in their outcome. But we have to be willing to do that. Most of us are attached, married to our point of view. We get into arguments. We get into arguments. What's the difference between an emotional argument and an intellectual argument? Chassidus says the following. An emotional argument is when, as a result of our differing ideas, I think less of you. I don't agree with you, therefore you're less than. Which is not a healthy way to have arguments. Intellectual arguments are arguments where we differ in ideas, but we relate to each other as people, not more and not less, exactly the same way. What is the test to know? Everyone thinks they're arguing intellectually, especially when they're right. Oh, this is a purely intellectual argument. Why are you so passionate about it? Well, here's a test. It's a very easy test. If you are in a courtroom and 2 lawyers, one for the defense and one for the prosecution, the prosecutor and the defense attorney, are standing and arguing in court. Technically, if they were asked to switch sides, they would be able to make the other person's point perfectly, if not better. That's what they do for a living. They were given something to defend, a point to defend. It really doesn't matter what they think about it. It's irrelevant. It's their job to do. The prosecutor's job is to represent the state, and the defense attorney's job is to present the defendant. Period. What he feels is irrelevant, and if his job would be to do the other thing, he would do such a great job. Now you put in a room a guy like the editor of one of the websites, liberal website like Daily Kos, and on the other side you put the guy like Rush Limbaugh, and you put them in the room, and they're arguing. They think intellectually, but if you ask them to switch sides and argue the other side, how could they possibly do that? It goes against everything they believe in. Now here you have an emotional argument. Therefore, they can spew hate at each other and mean it. Well, I don't want to talk about entertainers because really they're entertaining us, so let's not go there. But technically, a person who's passionate about something, a political position, that argues with another person, they get really riled up about it and really upset about it. They cannot switch sides, possibly switch sides, because they are convinced that their way is the only way. It's very hard for us to detach ourselves emotionally from something and approach it from an objective view, the intellectual view, the cold view. But in order for us to be able to change the way we do things, we have to change the way we do things. And if we're stuck in our tunnel vision and we're emotionally attached to our point of view, then we have no way out. Because a person is always biased toward himself. The Baal Shem Tov explains further that God's decision to reveal himself to Moses in the thorn bush is also significant. God could have chosen a more majestic tree, but he desired to show himself to Moses in the midst of a scraggly shrub, as if to say that a lofty ego cannot serve as a resting place for the divine. Our pride tells us that we should be able to dictate terms in which God is to come to us. That he should meet us where we stand. But in truth, no matter how far along in our spiritual development we may be, it is only by letting go of old prejudices and preconceived notions that we allow ourselves to be receptive to God. And this does not only mean the perspectives and the preconceived notions that we have when we're using. Obviously we can't hold on to those. But spiritual growth is climbing on the ladder, walking up on steps. And every preconceived notion and perspective and idea that got me to this step cannot get me to the next step. Even if the previous step, I'm not referring to 12 steps now, I'm saying in general. Even if the previous step was a good, positive, spiritual step. But if I'm not willing to let go of my preconceived notions, standing on this good spiritual step, I can't go on to the next step. The Talmud tells us there was a sage called Reb Zeir. Reb Zeir was a Talmudist, a person, one of the authors of the Talmud. And he knew all of the Talmud by heart. The Talmud says one day he decided to switch from studying the Babylonian Talmud to studying the Jerusalem Talmud. So in order to achieve that, he fasted for 100 days. So he could forget the Babylonian Talmud and start learning the Jerusalem Talmud. Is there anything wrong with the Babylonian Talmud? No, that's the one we study today. Most of Jewish law is based on the study of the Babylonian Talmud. Yet, there is a spiritual achievement also in the Jerusalemite Talmud, but they're not exactly on the same page. For him to be able to go to the next step, he had to forget all the preconceived notions and perceptions he had, positive ones. Great! He was a contributor to the Talmud. Yet, if he wants to go to the next level, then I have to get over my preconceived notions and my perceptions, even that got me to where I am today, which is a positive place. Unless I want to be stuck here. Now, we're just going to finish this little paragraph. Now one might ask, is a sponsor fallible so that one may equate listening to one sponsor to listening to God? The answer, quite obviously, is that a sponsor is not a prophet, nor is he or she incapable of poor judgment. A sponsor is not appointed by God. A sponsor is much greater than that. A sponsor is appointed by you. He's working for you. What do you want? The power of the sponsor comes from the person who agrees to take the sponsor's advice. God can communicate with us in all sorts of ways. He can communicate with a booming voice from Mount Sinai, or with a helicopter trying to rescue us, or whatever it is. There's nothing marvelous in that. What is the utmost significance, however, is that when we allow ourselves the possibility of stepping away from our own viewpoint and open ourselves up to taking directions from someone else, we remove the greatest, nay, the only impediment to conscious contact with God there is. That great impediment is ego. And whenever the ego is quieted, we're always more receptive to truth. And people go around, I said, do you have a sponsor yet? I haven't found anyone. Oh, isn't there? Well, I haven't found anyone that's good enough for me, basically. Now, where does that come from? Not because I think that I'm too sick. I just think I'm too good. And And there isn't yet on earth someone who as good as me who has more recovery than me. Because if anything is, I have achieved it already. That's where we get stuck. That's the ego. So finding someone else is the first step of saying, I'm removing myself out of taking so much space. I'll finish with this story. There's a chassid, a follower of a Rebbe, that came to me and says, Rebbe, I can't stand it anymore. When I go to synagogue, everyone's stepping on me. No one has no respect for me. Everyone's stepping on me. And the Rebbe looked at him and says, who asked you to spread yourself all over synagogue, that everyone, wherever they go, they step on you? Obviously, if you're full of yourself and you're all over the place, then you're going to bump into people and it's going to hurt. But don't blame it on the people. You have to make room. You have to shorten, restrict the amount of place that your ego takes. So there's room for other stuff. There will be room for other people. And automatically there will be room for God. So is your sponsor God? No. But once you go for a sponsor, there's room for God suddenly. Automatically.